start. And so, first of all, today we're going to talk about what is written in the schedule as usual. Okay, so React forms, how to do input from the user in our web applications. And by the way, you find the schedule for this week and also next week. Okay, this week, next lecture is on Thursday. Tomorrow there's the lab with my colleague, still with my colleague. And next week, everything is with me, but there will be 2 labs, okay? Tuesday and Thursday, but next week, not this week, okay? So we catch up with the topics that we're going to see on Thursday and next Monday, okay? Good, so let's have a look at the slides, and we start discussing about the forms, okay? So not so many slides today, so we are going to experiment quite a lot, because then you are going to do the same in the lab as well. Not tomorrow's lab. Tomorrow's lab is about the state, so introduce the state, and the list of films will become a state. You can edit this list of films, deleting films in particular, and so on. And next week, you introduce the forms, and the rest we are going to see soon. Okay, so, okay, let's go full screen. So, forms are the foundation of user interaction. Okay, without the forms, the user cannot, do that much except clicking around in the application, right? It cannot enter any data, okay? And so how can we handle forms? Well, in JSX, but in React in general, okay? That's the topic for today's lecture. So actually, forms are something that has been introduced since the beginning of HTML. So when the HTML was born, forms were already there, okay? So they are quite old, I would say more than 30 years old, more than you. Not than me, but I mean, almost. And so, actually, everything that is so old has issues in terms of inconsistency, typically, because they were designed quite a number of years ago without thinking about all the possibilities and all the things we would like to do today, okay? So, native HTML forms are inconsistent. They have different ways of handling values. Like a text box has a certain value, has a certain way of handling the values, and the radio buttons, multiple choices, and so on, might have another way. Other events and other ways of handling the changing of the input and so on. Okay, that's because they were designed really in the old days of HTML. Okay. So, and we cannot change anything, because for backward compatibility, if you don't want to break old applications, you cannot just tell the browser, just, use another event to handle this change in the form, okay? Because old applications expect to use the old event, okay? For instance, these are just a couple of instances. The onChange event on a radio button is not easy to handle. Okay, radio button, I hope you know what it is. When you have multiple choices, you can only select one, okay? And value, for instance, in the text area does not work. Text area is a large box where you can type text with multiple lines and so on, like when you type an email or input some paragraphs or text inside, posts inside an application, okay? And actually, since React virtualizes all the DOM, it also virtualizes all these aspects, and in particular, it flattens this behavior, exposing through the JSX a much more uniform interface. It virtualizes everything, both the DOM and the events, okay? So it can make all these differences disappear to you that are, if you're developing in React, okay, using JSX and so on. Because basically it remaps the events and the behaviors, these values and so on the correct, on what you would expect by programming React in a uniform way, okay? So the library does a lot of things. It handles the virtual DOM, the differences, the DOM update and so on, but it also handles these different behaviors of different elements in the form in the actual DOM, okay? So it does quite a lot of things, okay? good. So now we are going to see not what the actual DOM does, because it's not of interest for us, because we want to develop in React. And it's also more simple if you think in terms of React. And so we will see how to handle the forms in React. Okay? Designing them and describing them in JSX, and then handling the corresponding events. Okay, so in JSX forms, so all the controls of the form that you might have, the text area, well, the button's not so useful, but I mean the text box, one line, or any other input control, the buttons, the selection, the combo box, and so on. The value attribute always holds the current value of the field, okay, the field or the control of the form. Instead, the default value attribute holds the default value that was set when the field was created. So there is a default value, let's call it the initial value, what you see written inside the text box when you render the page. And then there is the value, which is the actual value that changes with the user input. The user can change it, okay? I mean, other example, but I think you can have a look and search in the internet using the AI whatever you want when you need it, okay? Because the input field is the classical one-line text box, or it can become a button or something else like a radio button and so on. And then there are other HTML tags, text area select and so on, which might behave a little bit differently because you need to specify content inside these elements or something else, attributes and so on, okay? But I mean, we will see examples, so no need to worry too much. And when you encounter a new element, you just search in the documentations. It's quite easy. Change events in JSX forms. React provides a more consistent on-change event, and that's really, really important for us because we want to be notified every time the user changes anything inside a control of the form. Because we will have states, as we will see in a few minutes, that keep track of the state of each control in the form, okay? So we need to be notified each time the user changes something because we need to update the state. Okay, so we will have an event handler where we do a set of the state that we saw last lecture. Okay, so we pass a function, an event handler, to the onChange attribute, and we subscribe, in short, to events on the form fields or controls, okay? So every time the value changes, this onChange event is fired by the browser. It means that the corresponding function is put into the callback queue, and when the browser, the JavaScript interpreter in the browser is doing nothing, it just gets executed, okay? It's a queue, as we know. OnChange fires every time the user changes something. So if the user types a single character into an input or text area fields, the event onChange fires. It means it's activated. So the callback is put into the callback queue. Callback is executed. Typically, it does something very simple, just update a value, okay, and so on. And it works consistently across the fields, and that's the advantage of different fields. And that's the advantage of the React events. Okay? Good. And so at this point, let's say we know what to write in HTML, so input, type text, text area, whatever. We need to handle these events that happen on in the fields of the form. And we need to write an event handler callback function, okay? So just a normal JavaScript function. Just remember that as we already saw before, when we talked briefly about event handlers, each event handler function is called with one single parameter, the event object. You remember that we wrote event, arrow, and some code, okay? And the event, we have some attributes inside the event object, event, target, value, and so on. And that's very convenient because in this way we can get the value of the of the form control or the form, as we call it, the form field, okay, in a very simple way, okay. All events objects have a standard set of properties. Now we will see some of them, but all of them have the target property, which is actually the source of the event. It's just called target, unfortunately. Maybe if you design it today, maybe you would call it source, but they call it target, okay? That's the target of the event. So where you clicked, where you typed the character, and so on, okay? Some events, depending on the categories of events, may have more specific properties. Like if it's a mouse event, it might tell you where the mouse moved. If it's a click, where the mouse clicked exactly in terms of coordinates, whatever. If it's an animation event, it might tell you, I don't know, how long it's set. I mean, how long it's supposed to last, and so on. I don't know. I just invented. Okay, but of course, depending on the event, there are a set of properties which are common to all events, and then specific properties depending on what the event is signaling. Okay, so synthetic events, those handled by React, okay, they wrap the corresponding DOM events, but we don't really care too much, apart from the fact that they have the same name, so it's easy to use them, okay. Actually, they have the same attributes as the DOM event, and as a DOM event, no, it's not the DOM event, it's a React event, okay? And DOM event is also an attribute, but we don't have a need to access this attribute, okay? What is really needed is basically, I would say, 2 of these 4 items. The prevent default, we will see this in the end, and the target that we already saw before, okay? Target points to the source of the event. In the case of a form element, target value is the current input value, okay? So very useful, because you want to know what has been inserted by the user, you just access target.value. You don't care where you wrote the event handler. You don't have to get it by ID or searching it in the DOM tree and so on. You just passed as a reference, okay, the target is a reference to the element in the virtual DOM of React that generated the event. And so you can simply get the actual value with the dot value syntax, okay? And typically, all form elements have a name, a unique name inside the form. Okay, the name is unique only inside the form, and it identifies which control or which field you are accessing. Okay, it's like first name, last name, address, and so on. Address and so on. So they all are text fields, but they have different meanings. So you distinguish them by giving them a unique name. Okay? Good. So this is a big list of synthetic events, but again, I mean, just to give you an idea, there are so many events, probably 100, something like this. These are not all events, okay? But the one that we really care about are the on-click, on-change, and on-submit, okay? And then maybe at a certain point you might want to care about the one in bold on some occasions, okay? Not so often, and the others probably are not useful in your application, but it might be interesting to know they exist, okay? Like in a more complex application, maybe you want to care about copy and paste, there are events about this, and so on, okay? Or key press, key down, key up, and so on. Maybe you are implementing a sort of video game, but I mean in an actual web application, you don't really care about the fact that key has been pressed or released, okay? Just if a character has been inserted or not, okay? Good, I mean, just as an example, okay? So I invite you to focus on these 3 events, click, change, and submit for your web application and also for the exam. Unless we really require something specific, there's no need to typically to use other events, okay? Okay, tips, defining event handlers. Well, event handlers are just functions, okay? So you just declare a function in JavaScript. And the most common way of declaring functions in event handlers is to use the arrow syntax, okay? Because it's convenient, it's compact, and you can fit it sometimes even inside the JSX, right? Because you open the curly bracket, you write something, and you close the curly bracket. If you have to write function, etc., it becomes more complex, okay? But I mean, in principle, you can do it. You declare a function, you assign it to some variable. This variable has a reference to a function, and so you can use this variable as the handler for the event, okay? Just pass it through as the value of the attribute, okay? So both syntaxes are okay, are fine for our situation, I mean, for defining event handlers. You can even pass the name of the function as props. We saw it on Thursday, right? We passed a function as a prop, and the function was supposed to change the state that was included in another component, okay? So it's just a function. Functions are identified by references in JavaScript, and they can be passed around as values as any other value in JavaScript and also in React, okay? Just remember the fact that when you use it as an handler, I mean, this handler can be like on click, on change, on submit, on something, okay? You open the curly bracket, that's mandatory, okay? And you need to have a JavaScript expression which is a reference to a function, okay? So handler is fine if it's a reference to a function, so if it has been defined as a reference to a function, okay? We don't care about the syntax. JavaScript knows that that value is a reference to a function, okay? So these syntaxes are wrong. Why? The first one, because you call the function, okay? And so basically here you have the return value of the function, which is typically not what you want. I mean, you don't want to call a function to get another function as a return value when you write an event handler. Otherwise, the code becomes so complicated, so difficult to follow, which is really, I mean, confusing, okay? And you don't want to pass it as a string as well, okay? There should be some JavaScript because it needs to be a value that refers to a function. So it's not a string, not single quotes, not double quotes. It doesn't work, especially in JSX and React. Okay, so remember not to call the function. You can also indeed use a value that comes from a prop, that's fine. Props.handler, and we assume this handler is a reference to a function. Again, just don't call it. And if you need to call it because you want to pass two parameters, one parameter, two parameters, three parameters, and so on, how can you do this operation? Well, actually, the solution is at the bottom of the slide. You define another function. It's so easy, right? With the arrow syntax, you open and close the round brackets, arrow, and then you write your code that is calling this handler function with the parameters you like, okay? But here you get only one parameter, which we are actually neglecting. I mean, we are not using it. That is the event object that we talked about before, okay? So in this case, this prop handlers probably doesn't care about the event target, okay? It just does one action which is independent of the event target, okay? And that's a possibility. Okay, so passing directly the reference to the function or creating another function to call it is fine, okay? It's basically mandatory when you need to pass parameters because you cannot write directly parameters here without creating another function, okay? Because the function will be called using the event object as the single parameter. Okay, good. And now we come to the difficult part. What about the state? I mean, where do we keep the information about what's written inside the form. There's a text box. The user has written something. And do we need to keep it into a state first? Is it really mandatory? Is it useful? Does it help? I mean, now we try to solve this situation, this question, okay? So, actually, form elements are inherently stateful, okay? What does it mean? They hold the value in any case. I mean, there is React or there is no React, they hold the value. You have a browser, you write form input type text, that's a text box. User type something, there is a value. Either you are managing it yourself, we will see with React, whatever, and so on. But, I mean, the DOM is holding the value. It's holding the value that has been written by the user, if it's text, okay? If it's a radio button, which button has been selected, and so on, okay? All form events have a state because the user interacts with these elements, and what the user does is recorded by the browser, okay? But here we have the issue, right? We saw last lecture. React components are the ones which are designed to handle the state. But now we have a problem. I mean, the state stays inside the DOM element inside the browser. How can we handle the situation? And the point is that React assumes that props and states from React are the one used to render the component, okay? So, to correctly render the component from the virtual DOM, including the form elements, the form fields, or the form controls, as we call them in the JSX, we need to know which value the form control, the form field, and so on has, okay? So, this form control, so this form field, input type text, has a value, and React needs to know which value has to write inside the text box when it renders the element, okay? So, in short, the point is that we need to notify React on every change. Every time something changes in any form control, form field in our application, and we need to keep track of this value, where in a React state, okay? So first we need to notify React, and basically React has no way of being notified specifically about forms, just a way to be notified about a state change with the set state function that we saw last lecture, okay? So we'll have to create a state, one state for each form controller form field, and we will change that state every time we detect the user has changed something. And luckily we have this very well working on change event, okay, that we will use a lot, and we will write an handler that changes the state on the basis of what the user did inside the form controller, the form field, okay? So we need to update the component state. And then the rest happens automatically. As it happened on Thursday with the state. We change a React state, React re-render the user interface, and so it changes the appearance of the form as well, okay? But by the way, in the middle, we can also change what appears, okay? And I will show you an example, okay? So you type something, and we decide what we want to show to the user in the field, in the form fields, okay? We can simply show what the user did, like it typed a letter, like A, and we show the A, but we can make it uppercase. We can decide that only digits and no characters are allowed, okay? And we show nothing, and so on, okay? We show a message, and so on. We have an event handler, we can write whatever we want inside this event handler, okay? Of course, now we will see some examples, okay? Because the discussion is quite theoretic at the moment, okay? So, at this point, we have two states. And that's always a problem, because we don't know where is the so-called source of truth. So, where is the correct value for the content of the form field or the form control. And if we use, as we do, the controlled form components, the source of truth, so what decides what to show inside the user interface will always be inside the React state. Okay? Only the React state. And the rest depends on the React state. So it's our duty to decide and to correctly update the React state depending on what's happening inside the application. So depending on what the user does with the form. Type something and so on, clicks, etc. The other approach, we will not use this approach in this course, not recommended, don't use it at the exam and so on, otherwise it will be immediately questioned and there is actually no reason to use it, okay? So don't use it. I mean, there are a few reasons, but I mean, if you're curious, I tell you during the break, but I don't want to tell everybody, otherwise everybody thinks it's good to use it, okay? On some really unusual occasions, it could be useful to keep the value directly inside the HTML form element in the DOM. This is the so-called uncontrolled form components, but we don't want to use it, this approach, because React has no state, so it will not re-render the application correctly when this state changes. Everything is manual, and so we go back to the situation in which we didn't have the React library. So React library becomes useless for this purpose, and of course it's an approach we don't like, okay? Okay, good. So let's see how a controlled form component works. So we have some React components. It can be the app, can be a specific component that we created for this purpose. And of course, there will be a function that defines the component, returns the JSX. Inside this JSX, there is some form field, input type, text, and so on, for instance. And inside the React component, we also have two pieces of code. One is the state. We said we want to have a state, okay? Almost all form elements contain a string, okay? So this is a very common example, okay? Not all of them, because the selection and radio button might have different values, but I mean, like the string is the most common example. Use state, initial value, empty string, or maybe you want to have a different initial value, still fine. And then you get the value and the function to set the value, x set x, okay? Name set first name, set first name, last name set last name, and so on, okay? Good. And this is just defines a React state. Really normal React state doesn't differ from the ones that we saw last lecture, during the last lecture, okay? And then we have the handler, okay? Change x, that's the name we gave to the handler, okay? And we define a function, and this function does only one very simple thing in the simplest case. Set of the state, okay? Set x with what? With the current value, event.target.value, okay? So you see how useful the event becomes, okay? Event.target.value, so we don't have to get a reference to a certain element and so on, and go there, read the value, and get the value and so on, okay? Simply event.target.value, okay? And as I told you before, React flattens this behavior over almost all form components, okay? Okay, good. And then we have the element to render. The element has to have two attributes. Value equal to x with a curly bracket. Actually, x, it's this x. That's a React variable. Okay? I mean, a JavaScript variable. Okay, that's a state. On change equal to, and that's the event handler, change x. Or we can take this code, event and so on, and just write it here, okay, if you like it. but here just for showing it clearly, we separated the things, okay? And so the form element, X is just displaced as the value, and this also means that if you don't update the value, React will continue rendering the form element with the same exact value, X, okay? So you type and nothing changes, because React will continue rendering with the same value. So you need to capture this onChange event and change the value of the state, so that the state in turn change the appearance of the form element, okay? That's the way in which controlled form components work. Okay, so setting the value plus the onChange makes the form component fully controlled. Okay? The alternative would be uncontrolled form component, no React state, okay? And so the state stays inside the elements, okay? But we don't like it, because basically we only read the content only on submit, and when the form is, when the user has finished filling up the form, and we cannot introduce behavior through React while the user is using the form, okay? And that's why we don't like it. These uncontrolled components will not be described nor used. Okay, so let's go back to the example. Very simple example, okay? And then I have the code. I forgot to upload it during the weekend. I uploaded this morning, but I mean, just a very small snippet of code. As a user stuff, you can just create a new React application, create a Vite at the latest, just copy paste this stuff, and the result is the same. You just test a very simple component, okay? So we have a function myForm takes prof. So this is a React component, okay? It has a state, const name, set name. You state empty string in the beginning, that's fine. I mean, it's a possible choice. Return some JSX. So returns a form, on submit, handle submit. So we can then do some console log. Label, input type text. And you see the two attributes that we saw before. Value equal to name. That's the value of the state. OnChange, handle change, that's a function we'll define soon. And then, just to complete the example, input type submit, value submit. So we have a button that we can click just to say we finished filling up the form, we submit the form. Okay? That's a traditional way of using forms in web application. Nowadays that you have the possibility to program all behaviors in JavaScript, you can also, let's say, forget about the submit form button, because I mean you're handling everything in JavaScript. So every click, you can get every click, have an event handler, and decide what to do. Okay? Also make a synchronous request to the server, as we will do next week's, talking about I mean the rest of the things we need to know for web applications and single page application. So let's have a look at the two functions. Okay, so handle submit, that's an event handler, has to be written as before. Okay, take the event and just, oh sorry, not the handle submit, the handle change. Take the event and just do the set of the state, set name, event.target.value. Okay, and that's a value that the user has inserted inside the DOM element, okay? And then the handle submit function. Handle submit function we run on the onSubmit event. The onSubmit event is only generated by a form when the user presses a type submit button, or maybe does some other actions like pressing enter and stuff like that, okay? So, and the browser interprets this behavior as the submission of the form, okay? And you can attach, and we'll say you must attach an event handler to the onSubmit event of the form, because of course you can do some console log or whatever, but you specifically need to write this instruction, event.prevent default. because the default behavior of the browser when you submit a form is to go to the URL corresponding to the form, that is the action attribute, but we are not using the action attribute here because it's useless for us. But goes to the action attribute and sends an HTTP GET or POST request, okay, depending on the method attribute. We are not setting it here. And this instruction prevents this behavior. In single page application, we don't want the browser to go to the server without being instructed to do it by JavaScript, okay? And if you go to the server with a request from the browser, it means that the browser will reload all the content of the application. That is something that we don't want to that happens in a single page application. Okay? So, of course, console log, name submitted, the name, and this is just to check the content of the state, but I mean, the important instruction is here, event, prevent default, okay? It is one of the methods that is always present on the event object, okay? The other place where you should do the prevent default are the links, okay? You don't click with the links, but we will see that we don't need to use the anchor tag so much in our application. Actually, it's better to avoid it, okay? And we will see next lecture with the router and so on, how to use links and, you know, sort of navigate inside our single page application without reloading the application, without going to the server, okay? That's a topic for the next lecture. So that's the way in which we can write a controlled form component. Very simple form component. I mean, it just has one text box and a button. Okay? Uncontrolled form components, not described here. Okay? And just remember that you should use default value in case, because, I mean, the value fixes the value. Every time you render it, you change the value. The default value is something put there in the beginning, and then the user can change it. But we can experiment with this, okay? So don't forget about the onSubmit. Always call event prevent default as the first thing in the event handler of the onSubmit. And then, what's the purpose of saving the onSubmit? Well, sometimes you want to do some validation of the content of the form, okay? Like first name, last name, address, zip code, nationality, whatever, okay? Are all the fields filled in? Do they contain empty strings? That's something that I can check only at the end, okay? I cannot check it directly every time in each form field. Because the user is typing the name, of course the last name, the first name, and the last name is empty. The address is still empty, and so on. When the user has finished, you submit the information in the old application to the server. In this single page application, you tell JavaScript, I finished filling up the form, okay? And so do the checks, or do any check you like, okay? And that's a place where you would like to perform validation of form data before proceeding on, typically, okay? You can also do validations while you type, while you change things inside the single form fields, okay? And we will see examples in a minute, okay? But, I mean, you type a zip code. In Italy, zip codes are only digits, right? You cannot type letters. I mean, alphanumeric characters, alphabetic characters. And so these checks can be done while the user types, right? But other checks can only be done afterwards, okay? Like you've been asked for the first name, last name, date of birth, and then from the social security number, that's in Italian is the codice fiscale, right? So that's long string that identifies you for tax purposes and so on. I mean, you need to type the first name first, last name second, and so on. And only when you finish typing everything, you can do the checks, right? So And so the place where you would like to check before taking the information into consideration is probably the onSubmit event handler, okay? And there you might want to validate the content, okay? Like you type the a zip code that is valid, 5 digits, only 5 digits, okay? That's for the Italian case. Or you might want to check, I don't know, like they asked you to type the course code for the Politecnico. There are 7 digits, the first two, 7 letters, first 2 are digits, and so on. I mean, you might want to do these checks. That's something you can do, okay? You want to check for the credit card number, is it formally valid? For the bank account number, it's formally valid, and so on. I mean, you can do this kind of checks. And you may want to use validators, so libraries that do these checks for you, okay? We already saw them when we talked about the server side. Actually, the same exact library. I think it should work, right? As a validator, okay? That checks if it's, for instance, it's a valid email address. Okay, very, very common check, right? You don't want to write it yourself. You want to use a function that does it for you. So you import a validator and you do the check, okay? We know that sometimes it's tedious to use controller for components because you need to, do all these operations. So create a state, create an event handler for the on change. Really tedious because every time you have a new field in the form, you need to create a new state, a new handler, and so on. Okay? So actually, actually there are libraries that can do it. I mean, I would say for the purpose of this course, also for the exam, probably there are not so many fields inside your forms. I think you can easily write, 3, 4 states and write the event handlers and so on. But I mean, just keep in mind that in a more complex application where you might have more input data and so on, there might be libraries that can help you. Okay, for instance, this Formic library and so on. Feel free to use it for the exam, but again, if you use it, I mean, make sure you understand how it works, not just tell the AI, well, I would like to use this library, and then you don't know what it's doing. Okay, so if you do not have any question, I think I will show you something, so it's a bit less boring, right? So, example form. So I have this example here in the examples for this week. That's week number 8. Today I added this example form, which I forgot. It's just npm create write at latest and just added a very simple component inside the app. Okay, so that's the app. So the rest is the boilerplate from Vite, right? And there is just app, that is this file, where I change the content of app and just say return my form. Okay, my form is a component. Okay, it's my form. It takes props. I mean, I'm not passing props. It's fine. But here inside, I would like to return a form with a label, input type text, value name, on change, handle change. So more or less, that's what was written on the slide, right? So, but here we can play a little bit. Okay? So the state, name, set name, use state, and that's the empty string in the beginning. That's the initial value contained in the form. Handle submit, prevent default, just console log, as we saw in the slides. Handle change, let val even target value to uppercase. I would say I removed the to uppercase for the moment. Okay? And set name val. Okay? So just save it, just test it. Terminal in the correct directory, example form. I think I need to install the stuff. Yes. npm run dev. Okay, open the browser, and that's the result of the rendering. Okay, so very simple stuff. Just div id root. You remember that this is the root of the React element tree, and then we have the form. Form label is just label plus inside the input, so the two stays together. Input type text, value, that's the empty value. Right? Input type submit, value submit, that's a button. Okay? These are basic buttons, are not React Bootstrap buttons. We can change it to get React Bootstrap button in a few minutes, but before that, let's make sure we understand how controlled forms work. So, let's type something, A, B, C, D, E. Okay? Well, of course, you see that the DOM changes. This is the DOM, it's not the virtual DOM. This is the DOM, the browser. So, actually, form controls in the DOM have a state because it's written there, right? The value is this one, the one I changed. Okay? But the point is, let's have a look at the state. You remember the components, my form, that's a state, A, B, C, D. I change the state, okay? Because I change what I type. I delete a character. Okay, you see that the state has changed. What happened? I mean, the onChange event happened. The browser scheduled the function to be executed, handle change, the browser put the function in the callback queue. At a certain point it was executed, and it simply did set name with a new value, event target value. Okay? Because value can change because the user changes the value. Okay? And the fact is that we, as a developer in React, must make sure that we synchronize the value in the DOM value, I mean the value that is in the DOM with the state in React. And that's why we do set name. Okay? And by the way, this set name changes the state of the component, so it also tells React, re-render the component. React will re-render the component actually using the value that comes from the state, not the stuff that came from the user, okay? The value that comes from the state, okay? And I will show you that this comes from the state with the example that you saw before, right? It was two uppercase, right? Per case, if I remember correctly. Okay? So, now we reload the application. Okay? So now I'm typing lowercase characters, A, B, C, lowercase characters. You see, it happens as uppercase. Why? Because React renders what is written in the JSX. And JSX says input type text, value, that's the value in the state. But in the state, we set what we want. I mean, we want to convert it uppercase, we convert it uppercase. Okay? We want to prevent the user from writing, we don't set the state. And the value stays the same. And so on. Okay? So, just to make sure everything is working correctly, you can do like console log, name change, event target value. You can see that the user has typed the lowercase a, right? So let's restart again. Let's have a look at the console. I typed the lowercase a. Okay? You see, the lowercase a is here. So it's correctly got from React, right? A, B. Now the A was already uppercase. I typed the lowercase b. and this has been printed here, okay? Event target value is uppercase A and lowercase b. But then I decided how to modify it. And just set the state, and React does exactly what it did last week. You change the state, you render new content in the DOM, okay? Including form controls and form fields, okay? With the value that you put inside. Okay, let's have a look at the submit. Okay, so submit. Click on the submit. I do a click on the submit now. Name submitted AB. Okay, and you see that the application didn't reload. So we have a onSubmit handler. Note that the onSubmit is on the form tag, okay, not on the input type submit, okay? It's not on click on the type submit and so on. It's an event that happens at the form level. Handle submit, just do the console log and prevent default, just out of curiosity. Let's just comment the prevent default. Let's see what happens. In case you don't have the prevent default, okay, let me just type again AB, okay, let's submit to see what happens. The application has reloaded, everything has been reset. Why? Because there has been this submission towards the server. Actually, the server, didn't care. The application, the browser had no action on the form. So it just submitted on the URL where it loaded the application, that is slash, that's fine. But if you do a get on the slash, React, the server that comes with the Vite, just serve the application again, but the initial version of the application. That's why everything has been reset here, okay? So it's really, really important. Avoid the submission of forms, as well as clicking on actual anchor links, okay? Anchor links, we will discuss them next lecture, okay? But for today, we have the forms and we have the submission of the form. We must not submit the form. If I see that the application reloads at the exam, for sure you lose quite a number of points on the final mark, okay? Single page applications will never reload, okay? You can reload the application yourself, okay? You go here and you want to reload the application, of course that's possible. That's the user that is using the browser. You cannot do anything, right? Or you close the tab and you open a new tab. Nothing we can do about it, of course. But when you are using the application, you should not reload the application, because you lose the state, the React state on the client, the old state, okay? All the states of React on the client, okay? And this also leads us to thinking of what we are doing with these states on the client. Well, for the moment, it's only on the client. At a certain point, we'll have to send the information from the state on the client to the server. Like we would like to store something new, of course, if it has to be permanent, it must be sent to the server, put into the database, and then next time we will load the data from the database, we'll have this information. Okay? Good. I hope it's clear enough. If you have any questions or comments, just feel free to ask. Otherwise you just experiment with this very, very simple example, okay? For instance, we can say event target value, let's say you want to trim it to limit to a certain maximum length. What's the function to shorten a string? mdn take first n characters from string. okay? Substring, okay? I could ask AI, that's fine, okay? So substring from index start, index end. So I hope it works also here. Let's try it. Substring, okay? Substring 03, okay? Let's see what happens. Inspect, always have the inspector open because it's very convenient. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You see, it doesn't go over 3 characters. Why? Because, I mean, you look at the console, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, E, A, B, C, F, A, B, C, G. So we type the characters. But then we decide to process what's inside the state of the actual DOM element and decide how to update the state in React that correspond to the form control or the form field, okay? And then React renders what's inside the state, not what you typed, because it overrides what you typed, okay? That's the way in which you handle the forms. Of course, I mean, the most intuitive thing is, of course, allowing the user to do anything he or she wants, right? Because that's a natural behavior, but sometimes you want to constrain this behavior. Zip code, social security number, IBAN for the bank account number, email, you want to have an email. I mean, make sure that, the check is done at the appropriate time. If you check if a field or if a value is an email, when you type the first character, of course it's not an email. So this is a check that should be done later on, okay? When you finish, maybe on submit and so on, okay? Or maybe you want to give some warnings while the user is typing. Value still not valid. And when it's detected to be an email, you make the message disappear. That's a possibility. You have a state. You can do whatever you want with this state, because every time you change this state, React re-renders, okay? You have an event handler, you can do a check every time the user type or delete any character, okay? And so you can update anything you want inside your application. For instance, you can have a second state saying valid or not valid and so on, okay? For instance, let's try. Well, valid or not valid, let's say, yes. So just to try, const, oops, sorry. I should tell the AI to do these things, right? Valid, set valid. It's a state, right? Because I want to show it as a string, right? Use state, let's say false, okay? In the beginning it's false, and let's have it here. Yeah, valid or invalid, okay? Just make sure everything is working, invalid, right? And then at a certain point, you can simply say, if val length greater than 3, set valid true. Otherwise, set valid false. Okay? It's an event handler. You can do whatever you want. So now there's no substring, right? So I can type as much as I want. BCD, okay? You see, it became valid. I go back one, it becomes invalid. You can do whatever you want. Email invalid, email valid, and so on. Valid email. Typically you want the error message to disappear in this case, and so on. Okay? So just up to you. That's the powerfulness of having the form controls written in the controlled way. So there is a React state that changes every time the user changes something in your control or in your field. Okay, last thing. Oops, sorry. Last thing I want to show you, I mean, very simple stuff. I mean, import bootstrap, form and button from React Bootstrap. Yes, save, but I think we didn't install it. So Control C, npm install React Bootstrap. I think I need to install Bootstrap as well. Let me see if it works this way or not. No, maybe it works. No. Okay, it works. Okay, and then form input. Okay. Maybe it's better to use button with React Bootstrap, but I mean, not so much difference. Something still not working. Input is not defined. What's the name for input? Form control. Okay. No. Yes, so bad. Button type submit. Variant. Right? No, there's something wrong here. I guess I'm missing something here. Let's see if there is some suggestion. Form. The button should work. I'm not sure why button. Button, did I import it? Yes. Maybe I forgot to import the Bootstrap, right? Import. Let me copy paste from the other because I don't remember the import. The CSS. Okay. Now, of course, we need to install the Bootstrap. Almost there. Yes. Okay. So there were React Bootstrap components, but there was no CSS. Okay, that's why it didn't work. Okay, didn't style it correctly. Okay, so I mean, just an example of what you can do. I mean, that's stuff that you can easily experiment inside. I mean, during the labs. Okay. I would say save it for the moment. Maybe we can even commit it. Yes. Simple for example. Commit push. I guess it asks for the password. No, I got it. Okay, good. So now, rest of the lecture, what are we going to do? Well, actually, we have an application, right? So let's stop this application, and let's take the other application, React QA. Actually, it's React QA Forms. Just in the name, it's the stuff that we finished last week, and now we try it. Let's make it a bit smaller. So that's the stuff we had last week, just improved maybe in some small things. You know, sometimes there's something, I mean, I don't remember what I improved, but I mean, really minor things, okay? And you remember here we had a state, I think it was inside main, yes. The 4 answers, and we made the delete button work, change the state updates the view, and the user interface. So there are 3 elements, not 4 now. And then there are the buttons working, right? And so on. And now we will modify this application to be able to create a new answer. Okay? So to create a new answer, we need to make room for the user, have a place where the user can type things. Because we need to ask for a date, we need to ask for a text, for the author in this very simple application, and for the score. So there are 4 controls or 4 form fields that we would like to insert into a form. Make a form appear, okay? So either the form is always there or we make the form appear in some ways. And then when we press the add button, that is more or less like the submit button of the form, we want not to reload anything, right? Prevent default, but we want to change the state and add a new item in this array. And the rest will happen automatically. React will re-render the interface, and so a new element will be inserted in the list and will appear here. Okay? So that's what we are going to do now. Okay? We start with very simple stuff. That means we start from deciding where to put things. Okay? And then we will have a break and we'll finish in the second part of the lecture. So, we already have a place with the components, right? Answer components and question components, right? Okay, good. Probably it's not that bad if we create a form components, right? JSX. Just for convenience, so it's not mandatory, but I don't want to fill up the app JSX file with a lot of code and then it becomes difficult to read everything, right? And then function. What is my form? I'm not sure what's the name I decided to use for this form. That's up. Components, form, components, answer form. Answer form, what does it take? Props, of course. And then, well, we will think about the states and so on. But at a certain point, it must return something, right? So it must return a form, right? Return. Form. Good. Okay. And then we need to decide what to put here. 4 text fields. Well, in the beginning could be enough. Form group. Let's avoid what you don't understand. At the moment, I don't know what does this mean. Okay. Form group, form label. Okay. Answer. Form control. I don't like the text area. Okay. Okay. Form group. Export answer form. It's a module, remember, right? So, in app, I think we can import it somewhere. Import answer form, and we need to render it somewhere. I think we can render it here, row, below the, yes, form, answer form. Answer form, yes. Okay? So AI is pretty helpful. It allows me typing faster, but sometimes it doesn't do what I really want to do, right? You see, a new part has appeared. Answer form, right? You see, Answer form, it's a form. Form control, form label, form control. Okay? And that's a form control. And now, is there a state? No state, because I didn't declare any state yet. It's up to me, the developer, to decide I want a controlled form. So I want to declare a state in React. So let's declare the state. So const. Wait, we will rewrite it later, but answer. Answer text, set answer text, use state empties. Fine. Okay. And then value answer text. Let me do like this so you can see it. On change, event, set answer text, target value. It's fine. Right? Nothing else. Save. What's the difference from before? Well, that doesn't work. That's the difference, right? Use state is not defined. Import. Save. Okay. Can you see any difference? Well, if we go in the component and we see the state, you will see the state. Okay? It takes a little while to update the state, you remember, right? But, I mean, that's a state, right? Of course, I mean, now we just create a state in React. That's fine. The point is that we need to finish the form, but we will do it after the break, okay? And we need to attach something to the onSubmit event of the form. That would be the best thing to do, right? Because I mean, any form typically has to be submitted, either with the button, with the enter key, and so on. So attaching an event handler to the form submission event is always recommended, because you need to intercept this event. Because of the reason I told you before, you don't want to reload the application, right? Handle submit. Of course, I need to write this function somewhere. Let's see if prevent default. Yes. Console log submitting answer text. Okay? And then the onSubmit, well, I need a button, right? Button, type submit answer, right? Yes. Save. Let's see the result. Oh, still something wrong? Yes, so easy to get. Button is not defined. I mean, the AI is doing good suggestion, but I mean, not so good in updating the imports, right? Could have been done automatically, right? Okay, so just reload the application so you see no errors here. A, B, C, submit answer. Submitting answer ABC. Okay, so we attach an event handler to the submit event. Okay, and so we can go on in this way and create all the fields of the form. Oops, sorry. And just decide how you want your application logic to work. Okay, so I think now probably would like to have, as we said, 4 fields: one for the date, one for the text, one for the auto, one for the score. Having the button to submit it, and the submit button does not just do console log very easily, but it wants to change the state in main. Okay, and that's a problem, right? Because in main, where is the main? Oh no, we are inside the main. So answer form and state is here, and we are below main. So no, that's not a problem. Okay, so we have a state in a parent component, so we don't have to move the state, the main state that is the list of answers, and we will have to update the state. So we will do what we did last week. we need to pass a callback to the for answer form to be called when you do the submit. Everything is valid, good, update the state. And the rest should happen automatically. Okay, that's the purpose and the powerfulness of React. Okay, so I would have a break here, so you have time to think a little bit about this. I also commit this example I just modified, so you have the code in case you want to have a look. And then in the remaining part of the lecture, so we still have 1 hour and something, we will modify the application and fix the form and make sure the form works, and also do another thing, the edit of the answer, okay? Because editing an answer is very similar to this problem. Adding an answer means starting from an empty form, right? Editing an answer means starting from a form which has already been filled in, okay? So we will recycle the component, so you understand the powerfulness of the components as well. We don't write one component to add and one component to edit, because they contain the same fields. We would like to reuse them. And so depending on the process we pass and so on, we structure a more complex application. Okay, so unless you have questions or comments, I will stop here for the first part of the lecture. So you can have 10 minutes break as usual, and then we restart and continue this example. Okay? Okay, don't see any questions, so thank you and see you in 10 minutes.